Hi y'all, welcome back to Joey's Booked. Today we are going to be celebrating queer voices for Pride Month. And in doing so, we are going to be looking specifically at queer authors. So instead of just picking books that have queer characters in them in queer representation, I wanted to specifically go out and find books that were from authors who are openly queer on some form of the spectrum. I do not know specifically what every author's identity is in this, but they have been openly queer to some degree, whether they are gay, whether they are bi, trans, so on. And I just want to do that because so much in media, whether it is film, publication, music, whatever other source, even when there is LGBTQ plus representation, it is not always from someone who is currently undergoing some of that. There are so many times when there's just a lot of misrepresentation, or even as it's become more popular in some media, there's still instances where it's not always shown in the best light. So as someone who is part of that community, Pride's very important to me, and I think it's really important that we are taking the time to pick up from authors who are part of that community. So, in this video, we are going to be reading from about 4 different LGBTQ plus authors, and we are going to be looking at some of the different things that they have to say, either on the queer experience or on whatever other experiences they may have. And we're just going to kind of jump into it and see where it goes from here. So first, I think to start this off, we are going to be starting with A Minor Chorus by Billy Ray Bellcourt. So we're just going to kind of jump in a little blind on this, see where it goes, and I'll update you once I've read some of it. So I've finished the first book of this vlog, A Minor Chorus by Billy Ray Bellcourt. A Minor Chorus is a really kind of strange kind of book because it is written almost as if it's fictional nonfiction. And what I mean by that is it reads almost like a nonfiction essay collection. Instead, everything is completely fictional and made up by Bellcourt. From what I understand, we are following a narrator that basically parallels Bellcourt's personal life, but is fictitious in nature, and some of the experiences that he has are not completely the same. And basically, our narrator is a PhD student, and he is kind of wanting to get out of academia and move on and write a novel, but he's not fully sure exactly what he wants it to be about. So his plans is he's going to leave in the middle of his big thesis, and he's going to go back to the reservation that he grew up on. This reservation, and even where he is going to school, is set in northern Alberta, so not far outside of Edmonton. And the majority of these essays are interactions with the people on the reservation or nearby, or other interactions the author has had. And it kind of goes through, and it doesn't really tell a story, but it shares all these smaller stories of what it really means to be Indigenous, or what it means to be queer, or both. A lot of it highlights both. I thought that a lot of the topics discussed were very strong. I thought the language in this at times could be a little pretentious. I think it was because it was so highly rooted in that academia. But at the same time, because of that, sometimes there were quotes that made me wish that I annotated books. I'm not much of an annotator, but there were some absolutely gorgeous lines throughout this that really just kind of struck a chord with me. Where this lost me a little bit is, while it is heavily character-driven, there were some characters that I didn't feel for as much as others, and sometimes it would draw me out depending on which essay that you were reading, or which interview you were reading, and it felt a little disjointed at times. My biggest complaint with this is that it really didn't go anywhere or have much of an ending. You're learning about all these experiences, and you keep going back to this person that our narrator has grown up with, and you kind of get his story by the end, but you don't really get any outcome on anything the narrator's doing. You don't really get any answers. It's just more him trying to find an identity for what he wants to write about. With all of that, I think I'm going to give this a 3.5 stars. I was really felt like it was kind of middle of the ground, even though the topics discussed were really important, which is kind of where that extra half a star comes from. But it didn't fully pull me where I wanted it to, even if there were some things that kind of resonated with me. So next, I think what I'm going to pick up from here and start maybe tomorrow, one of my all-time favorite authors at this point, and that's going to be The Trees Grew Because I Bled There, and some other short stories by LaRocca. But he is slowly becoming one of my favorite authors because he just writes some really, really crazy stuff. So all I know is this is a short story collection. Because it's a LaRocca, I believe that it's probably going to have either some body horror or some darker topics, lots of trigger warnings. So I'm really excited to pick this up, and we will check in from there later. Alright, so it is the next day, and I am going to be checking in again because I have just finished The Trees Grew Because I Bled There by LaRocca. This was such a good, unhinged read of a time. I love horror, and that is just going to always be my go-to genre, and this just hit everything that I wanted it to, even though it was really weird, really out there, and just kind of strange. I kind of thought this one was interesting because there were several themes that really came through on this collection and some things that I didn't know it was going to be about. I would say to anyone that is planning on reading this to always check your trigger warnings, especially anything with this author, because it is gory, it's crazy, there's a lot of taboo topics and stuff that come up. In this collection, there were particularly some really weird things going on that could really trigger some people. This one had a weird theme where several of the stories had to deal with children or babies and just some strange things going on, whether it was like missing children or the loss of a child, or other heavy topics. So definitely big trigger warnings for that. And as always, this was filled with body horror, but in some of the best strange ways, and I absolutely loved it. My favorite story out of this would probably be The Strange Thing We Become, which was about 3 or 4 stories into the collection, and it really reminded me of reading Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke, which is also by LaRocca, and another read that I absolutely loved because of how unhinged it was. It was also written very similarly because it was written in what I assume were Reddit posts. It was online forum of some kind and kind of telling the story, so it had that mixed media format to it where it wasn't a standard writing style, and those that LaRocca have done have always been some of his best for me. It's not something I always love to read, but if it's done well, I find it very effective. So I am going to be giving this collection, against my probably better judgment, 5 stars. As far as recommending it out, always check your warnings, and if you do pick it up, hopefully it's something you enjoy. But it is easily a 5-star for me, probably my second favorite of his works. And for another book, I think we're going to kind of go back the literary kind of route and go with a real heavier literary fiction, and something that's not quite so short since I'm kind of flying through these. And I think I'm in the mood for something just a little bit longer and a little bit different from what I've read so far. So what I think I'm going to pick up is going to be a newish release novel called Bellies by Nicola Dinan, I believe is how you pronounce that. And this is a story about 2 queer men in their 20s, I believe, that meet, and they kind of fall in love, they start to get to know each other, and end up dating. And sometime along that dating line, one of them comes out as trans and starts to transition. And it kind of just follows their life and how this change has affects both of them individually and as partners. I just kind of found this at Barnes & Noble on a whim, and I saw it was from a trans author, and that really excited me, just because it's so important to see more and more trans representation in the media. A lot of times trans gets pushed to the side, or there's even transphobia within the community. So it's very nice to see more diverse voices kind of getting brought up. So I'm really excited to read this. This is going to be way out of my comfort zone of something I normally wouldn't pick up, but we're going to see how it goes, and hopefully we're going to have a good time. Alright, so it's been a couple of days since I've updated this reading vlog, and I've just been really busy with some work stuff and some other things I've had to get done, so I haven't been able to read as much as I normally would like. Right now, I'm actually getting ready to drive up to Kentucky to visit my family for Father's Day, and I'm going to be staying with them a few days, so I'm not sure how much reading I'll get done there either. But at this point, I am about 145 pages into Bellies, and it's okay. I really, really want to love this because of the trans representation in it, but a little bit of it is more, it's just very obvious that it's a debut. A lot of the writing is a little too simple for me. I don't really like the dialogue. I'm having a really hard time telling the difference between our two main characters, Tom and Ming. The majority of the book so far, at 45% of the way through, has just been setting up their relationship. And I'm all for a character study or like a relationship study or something like that, but it's just setting it up and continuing to set it up. But there's not a whole lot really being set up. I'm not feeling a connection with these characters or with them with each other that well, even though they talk about all these important things. It's like they're almost the same kind of just partying kind of characters in their 20s. We've just reached the point, almost 40% of the way or more through, where one of them has decided that they want to transition, and they're finally having these talks about these more difficult topics, and I'm hoping that it picks up a little bit from here, but we're gonna just kind of have to see where it goes. So since I'm gonna be going to my parents and I'm not fully feeling this, I think I am gonna pick up one more book, hopefully, for this vlog. I think that's gonna be Salt Slow by Julia Armfield. So it's another kind of literary one, but I have read from Julia Armfield before, and I absolutely loved Our Wives Under the Sea, even though it was more the literary horror side. I don't know if these short stories are going to be touching as much on horror as it is just social topics and things like that, but he is another queer author that I love, and I'm really excited to read from. So I may kind of break up Bellies with some short stories here and there. I'm also about to be on the road for about 2 hours, and then another 2 hours when I come back in a few days. So I might try to find some kind of audiobook. I don't know if I'll be able to find anything readily available from a queer author, but we'll see what I can find. But anyways, I'm going to get on the road, and hopefully I'll check in with you guys before too long. So it has been a couple of days at least, probably 4 or 5 actually, since I've updated this video. Over the weekend, I went up to my parents to visit for Father's Day. We had lots of family over. As expected, I didn't have a whole lot of reading time, though I did get some done, and honestly got more done than I thought I was going to. Like I mentioned in my last update, I did end up looking for an audiobook. The one I found was not a queer author, so it's not really pertinent to this video. I did read Hide by Kirsten White, which I knew better than to do, but it was a quick audiobook I could find on the fly. There was some queer representation, not some that I was definitely the happiest with, but it was there. Not gonna go much more into it. I'll talk about that in my full out wrap up. It was really, really not good. It's probably one of the worst books that I've read. So I'm gonna leave it at that. Listen to that audiobook, not counting it towards this vlog, but it happened. Since I have been home the last few days, in my lack of motivation, I have still managed to finish not 1, but 2 books. So the first one that I did manage to finish is Bellies by Nicola Dinan. And I had a bit of a trip with this book. I had quite the experience reading this book. When I started this, I was super excited. This is actually going to be a 5-star prediction for me, even though it was super outside of my comfort zone, just because this is a book that is by a trans author, and it's about someone transitioning. So when I started reading this, I was waiting and waiting, and I wasn't connecting to the characters. In this, we are following Tom and Ming, and they are 2 university-age students in London that have met a a big part of Ming's identity is that they are also Malaysian. We are following them as they start a relationship, and as the relationship grows, and then we're also following some of the other relationships they have in their lives, whether it's friends or family or whatever else. And there is a lot more focus on the friends and family part of that than I was expecting. And then the big point of the book, though, is that one of them decides to transition from male to female. And I thought that was going to be the big thing in this book. And I thought that was going to be the main focus. And I think I was almost halfway through this book, and I was still waiting for someone to have the conversation of, hey, I think I'm trans. Or, hey, I want to transition. Or something to that degree. That was the representation that I was looking for, and it wasn't happening. There were some hints, but it wasn't happening. And then all of a sudden, as things started to happen, I was just like, oh, this is not the way I would have handled this story. And the end of this book, though, took us to a point that hit me way harder than it ever should have. And it did so much for the story. It made my enjoyment of this go back up, and it was not what I was expecting at all. There is a particular character that has a story arc, and their ending in this book isn't what I thought it was going to be. And the way BIPOC trans author made me care so deeply about the straight white male character was not what I was expecting. And that was probably the character that I cared most about in this. And I did grow to care about some of the other characters, but the writing was very hard to differentiate sometimes whose perspective you were starting in if you didn't know already. And it just took me a long time to connect. But there were so many great quotes in this towards the end. There was so much about just connection with people and relationships. This is what I imagine when people talk about Sally Rooney and how it's just a lot about nothing, even though there's things that happen, but it's just like daily life. Because that's what this follows, is it's following different experiences. There were a lot of queer experiences that I personally related to in this. There were experiences that we did get commentary on the trans identity, and I was really happy when those finally started to show up more. But it's also just the experience of how people grow and connect. And because of that, I am going to give this 4 stars, which was not what I thought once I started reading it. Between that and the way it ended and just some of the lines at the end, even though this is a debut and it's very obvious, I would definitely check out from this author again, and really am curious to see what they come with next. I also finished Salt Slow by Julia Armfield. And this was another book I was super excited to get into because Our Wives Under the Sea is one of my favorite books of all time. And Julia Armfield's writing is just absolutely beautiful. It is phenomenal. So even though I'd heard that this was a weaker collection since it was her debut and it was short stories, I still really, really wanted to check this out and kind of dig into the backlist, even though this was really her only backlist book. But I wanted to have this done before her new book, Private Rights, comes out later this year. So Salt Slow is a set of 9 short stories, and they are about either the female experience or human experience in general. Some of them are more absurd and weird, and then some of them are a little more mundane and just have kind of like that slight hint, and they're all very literary. When I started this, I loved the first couple of stories in this collection. I was really in the mood for something literary, and then I put it down to finish Bellies, and then I came back to it, and I was not quite in that mood anymore. That did kind of take away from my enjoyment of this, but there were still several stories in here, so out of the 9, probably 3 or 4 that probably would have been 4 to 5 star stories for me. There were a few that didn't quite hit for me, and then there was 1 or 2 I just didn't care for at all, and I kind of zoned out on when I did listen to the last 4 or 5 stories on audio. I do think upon reread that this could at least be like a 4 to a 4.5 star book for me. Right now, we're going to give this 3 stars. It was really good. The writing was absolutely gorgeous. It was beautiful. The absurd things when Julia Armfield brings them in are just weird, especially that first short story. Mantis, I think is what it was called. That one was strange, but in like my favorite absurd way possible. So this is going to be 3 stars. It was a lot of fun. Maybe I'll reread it in the future and could possibly bump up even higher. So that is it for this video of reading books by queer authors. So just to recap, in this video we read 4 books. We read A Minor Chorus by Bellcourt, which was 3.5 stars. The Trees Grew Because I Bled There by LaRocca, which was the only horror book of this vlog and was 5 stars, unsurprisingly. Bellies by Nicola Dinan, which was 4 stars. And Salt Slow by Julia Armfield, which was 3 stars. So overall, I would say that this was a pretty successful reading week and a half of queer authors and just strange things. We're not talking about that audiobook still. It was horrible. Never pick it up. Everything else was 3 stars or higher, which is super exciting for me. I've been having a really good reading year for the most part so far. We've had a couple duds here and there, especially with 2 of these being short stories collections, which don't always work for me. So having them at 3 or higher and getting a 5 star in this video, super excited about it. So as always, thank you so much for checking out this video, and thank you for watching. If you want to see more from me, please make sure that you like this video, and you can hit the subscribe button down below. And if you want to leave a comment and you haven't read any of these books, you could always leave a pride flag down below for Pride Month, because that always helps the channel out as well. Thank you so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next one. Bye.